it's supposed to be a class. So it's not fair that someone has good class and someone yeah. So I think that's the best and the easiest way of doing it. And I think some of you like to have class during holidays. That you are
shall start. Today we will be talking about population changes. Since the module is about global dimensions, about Singapore, certainly population will be a strong feature. Here are the key takeaways and suggested resources. When we want to discuss about population, what characteristics or what features of population can you discuss or can you think about? Here are some examples of areas related to population that you can look into. Obviously, you can look at the population size, how big, how small the size is. You can look at the migration in and out of the country. You can look at the natural increase in the country. In very simple basic terms, natural increase is something like the number of births minus number of deaths. Not exactly, but something like that. So you just need to know that if births exceeds deaths, you have positive natural increase. And if deaths exceed births, you have negative natural increase. We may also look at sex ratio in the country, which is the proportion of males and females in the country. Mortality refers to death. So sometimes we want to look at death rate in more scrutiny. ethnicity, we can explore the types of ethnic groups in the country, their proportions in the countries, etc. So this is just a quick run through of how the population growth in Singapore may look like since the place became a British settlement. When Raffles landed on Singapore, there were less than 1,000 people on the island. Then after Singapore started to be under British rule, population increased rapidly. The population grew even faster during the rubber boom. Then the population grew even much faster during the post-war baby boom. As you can see, there was more than 50% increase in population. Between 1960 and 1990, the population growth was around 467K people added per 10 years. But if you break down these 30 years into smaller periods, there was actually one specific period with quite low population growth. And this was because of the antenatal policies implemented by the government. We will talk about this later on. From 1990 onwards, you can see that the growth of Singapore has been rapid and consistent with the rate of about 1 million people added per 10 years. Then, in this recent decade, there is some exceptional event happening, which is COVID-19 pandemic. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, there was an exceptional big fall in population in Singapore. So you can see negative 250K. Very rarely Singapore has a fall in population. Since independence, there were only 2 past incidents whereby there was some fall in population, which would be SARS and the first recession of Singapore. Other than that, from independence onwards, we are always having increase in population, and from 1990 onwards, we are having a surge in population, which you will see later on. Not so long ago, I think someone has commented that Singapore may have 7 million people by 2030. Then there was some hoo-ha, and there was some question how the number was derived. If you look at the trend over here, pre-COVID, we exclude the effects of COVID. It is actually quite a logical estimation. If the population in 1990 is about 3 million, and Singapore population grows by about 1 million people more every 10 years, by 2030, you really have about 7 million. Yeah. So, however, I would say that the latest decade has disrupted this 1 million by 10 years kind of speed, mainly due to COVID and also due to some multiple global economic recessions. So how would Singapore compare with other countries in terms of population growth? Surprisingly, if you do not know, the population growth of Singapore in recent 40 years is often higher than many other countries that have more people and that are more faster growing. So I have some examples over here. Singapore is the green line. As you can see, the green line is always above other countries, except for very special events, like the times whereby the government purposely wanted to bring down population growth, and during the one-off events of global economic recession. So during global economic recession, I've said before, there will be more foreigners leaving Singapore due to retrenchments and job loss. There will be less foreigners coming to Singapore due to less attractive job opportunities. So you would have a big drop in population due to the absence of foreigners. Then after recovery, you will see a difference. When you look at the charts, you can also look at the gradient and the jaggedness, the shape of the graph. You will see that Singapore shape is very different from other countries. All other graphs are quite gradual, quite smooth, quite stable. But the graph for Singapore is like a violent stock market, you just take up and down every 1 or 2 years, every 1 or few years. When you have very volatile population change in a country, suddenly a lot of people, suddenly a lot less people, this change can cause issues because when you have violent change, it means that the country has to rapidly adjust infrastructure, consumption, job landscape, people's psychology and mindset, etc., in order to fit the change. Sometimes things like psychology and infrastructure takes years to establish. It cannot be changed so fast. When you see the graph looks like this, it means that the rate of change graph is like that. It means that your absolute population number is like that. So later on, if you look at slide 49, which is the absolute numbers for population, you will see there's one period over there whereby Singapore population grow like that. Yeah.
This change is mainly due to migrant workers, right? Because I don't think natural.
Yeah. So all along, the main factor would be external foreign migration rather than local factors.
No, the one, I mean, when you say population, it's everybody, right?
Everybody. So when we talk about population, we mean every human being in Singapore, citizens plus non-citizens. So this is the time, so it will grow like that. Sometimes when you do things, it's not about whether you do it or not, it's about how fast or how slow. When you do it very fast, it may be harder to adjust. As I said, you need to do rapid adjustment. If I can make an analogy, if let's say I need to go for an expedition and I need to carry a 30 kg load, it may be easier for me to handle if I put on 10 kg first, then I adjust myself, then I put on 10 kg more and adjust, then I put 10 kg more and adjust. If you throw 30 kg on my shoulders right away in one shot, I may not be able to react and shoulder the load. Same thing here, when things change too fast, you may have issues when it is not well managed. Especially since population is interrelated with many factors. The Singapore government allows and prefers such instability in population growth because it wants to have flexibility in manpower supply. In its opinion, if you can have this flexibility, right, when more manpower is needed, I can quickly put in more foreigners. When less manpower is needed, I can quickly remove some foreigners. However, as I said, when you have a lot of these changes, you need to really maneuver the differences. Sometimes when the speed is too much for something, it will lead to repercussions.
Can we say because our population is small, so
You can hear it later on. I do not like that statement. So now I will go through some key population features of different areas of Singapore. I will go through very fast because some of the points have been covered before, and then some of the points are quite self-explanatory. So we'll start off with the period whereby Raffles just ended to the point around 1920s. Lost my guess quickly. So Singapore population started to rise from a low base. As I said just now, when Raffles landed on Singapore, there were less than 1,000 people on the island, and then population increases as more people came to Singapore to work, to trade, to live. Migration was the main pillar, the key pillar or the primary pillar causing population growth. People came to Singapore, migrants came to Singapore due to the attractive opportunities in Singapore and attractive policies in Singapore we mentioned before. So with a lot of come and go migrants, Singapore became a highly migratory, hence transient society at that time. When you say transient, it meant that the people that come and go type, their presence are rather temporary. So you may have traders coming in to do trading for a few weeks or a few months, then they move on to another places, then later on they may come back again as a cycle. For people who stayed longer for years in Singapore, there was no intention to quit Singapore, their permanent home, so they would just want to work for a few years, earn money, and then return to their homeland. The early immigrants were mainly males, and you have some couples from elsewhere as well. There was also native people who come from nearby areas like the Malay Peninsula and the Dutch East Indies. Singapore had Malay majority until the mid-19th century before changing to the Chinese majority thereafter. As we mentioned, it is due to the faster growth in migration from China after the Opium War period. Both push and pull factors play a part as migration. So push factor refer to factors that push people out of their homeland. Pull factors refer to factors that pull people to Singapore. So both push and pull factors must take place in order for migration to Singapore to happen. Someone must step out of their country, their homeland, and then someone must enter Singapore. So this is just some example of the early migrants, where they come from. We shall talk a bit more about Chinese migrants because they will form the major majority in Singapore in times to come. Why did the Chinese start to leave China? So here are some examples of possible factors: hardship at home, desire to earn more income, weakening government, may have played a part in some way. Then in the longer earlier times, even if the Chinese wanted to leave China, they would face certain restrictions in people movement to go out of China. But as you said, concessions made due to Opium War have caused China to open up certain ports to allow Chinese people to travel overseas and also to work overseas. And with the concessions being made, you have a bigger outflow of Chinese from China to other places in the world, including Singapore. Then why did the Chinese choose to come to this part of the world in Southeast Asia, including Singapore? Certainly job opportunities, money earning opportunities would be key considerations. For the Chinese, and actually for other groups of people, the migration pattern is mainly affected by global events outside Singapore, rather than local factors within Singapore. So when China had more instability due to war, political revolutions, or feudal conflicts, more Chinese would be leaving China. When Javanese and Malayan areas were having more prosperity, more Chinese would be leaving China to come here. Then, in contrast, if the world was having a global downturn, global recessions, due to whatever reasons, then you have less Chinese coming to Singapore. If the world economy is not doing good, Singapore economy will not be doing good as well, so they are not that motivated to come to Singapore. The rubber boom and the tin boom beforehand drew in a lot of migrants. We have mentioned before, these industries, these sectors are highly labor intensive. So they are highly production based, they needed a lot of ground workers. And with this high demand for workers, people are coming here to look for job opportunities. So you see the big number increase here. If you look at baby births, natural increase does not really feature in the initial population growth, or when you have population growth, it's really due to migration. Now we talk about migration just now, how about natural increase? Just now I say natural increase does not really feature at this point of time. Why? Because at that time, most of the migrants coming in are single males. You may have some small number of married couples from the nearby regions coming in as well. When you have a place with skewed sex ratio, whereby you have many males more than females, it will be harder to produce babies. You cannot expect the males to reproduce themselves. You cannot expect many males to share one wife. So with less females around, you would have problems in having a lot of births. So on one hand, Singapore was having low birth rates at that time. On the other hand, Singapore was having high death rates due to poor healthcare and hygiene provisions. So I put a note here, a balanced sex ratio with proportionate numbers of male and female is important to form families and then produce babies. Now we move on to the next era, which is something between 1920s to the start of World War II. So with that, the rubber boom continued to attract and stimulate a lot of migration. So you can see that 200,000 as compared to the earlier. It is almost like double within the span of 10 years or so. However, for this era, a key thing to note is the shift towards natural increase. Population growth was moving from migration to natural increase. So now you have more and more natural increase happening. So natural increase starts to contribute quite a lot until it is quite comparable with migration. If you look at the numbers here, in this era, you have natural increase adding about 180k human beings. Here, for migration, adding about 200k human beings. The numbers are quite similar. So when you reach this era, the rate of population growth due to migration and the rate of population growth due to babies became quite comparable, quite similar. Why you start to have more babies or multiple vectors? Now you have better hygiene and disease control, so you have lower death rates. People, including babies, can live longer. And then on the other hand, sex ratio became more normalized, became more proportionate due to a higher inflow of women to Singapore. And when you have a balanced sex ratio, more families can form, and hence more babies can be born. A bit more about more balanced sex ratio, why you have more females coming in. Earlier on, we said that travel rules in China had relaxed substantially so that people can go out of China to work, to live elsewhere. But this is not applicable to single women. So there were still a significant restrictions on migrational rules for single women. It was until after Xinhai Revolution, such rules were more relaxed. So after Xinhai Revolution, you have more relaxed migrational rules for single women, and therefore you have more single women coming to Singapore. At the same time, during this period, there was global economic downturn due to the Great Depression, etc. So you have some of the males leaving Singapore due to less job opportunities, or they want to go home for some other reasons. And at the same time, the Singapore government also imposed certain quota on male migrants, but this quota was not applicable to females, so females still can flow in quite readily. Then this may be a push factor why women would want to leave. At that time, China was experiencing war and chaos, so there may be more motivation for them to leave. Now we talk about World War II, Japanese occupation. During this period, migration would not be active, as you can imagine. Then, in terms of natural increase, there were high death rates happening due to killings from the Japanese army, as well as poor health living conditions in Singapore at that time. The killings are directed more at males. So more males were killed than females. In this sense, it's sort of evening out the sex ratio furthermore. It made the sex ratio balance even more. Now we move on to post-World War II. Some level of migration resumed after World War II. We mentioned before in lesson 6 that there was this episode with more migration from Malaya at a particular time. However, the key thing, the hallmark of this episode or this era would be babies, due to post-war baby boom. Due to post-war baby boom, Singapore had a big increase in babies born, and this babies born became the basis of population growth for the second part of the 20th century. So for the coming several decades of Singapore experienced a big increase in population growth, almost due to babies alone. Family formations accelerated after the war. So there are various factors contributing to the huge surge in babies born. Some will be mentioned here. So living conditions and people moods were uplifted after the war, so they were more willing and more able to give birth to more babies. And you also have more people decided to make Singapore their permanent home. So they started to form families in Singapore. In the past, they may just work for a few years and leave. But once you stay put and say, this is my permanent home, you will start to get married, form a family, and give birth to babies. Besides that, the common folk, the masses, had a tendency to give birth to many children. One reason is because they thought that infant mortality rate would still remain high like last time. So people tend to produce more babies as buffers, just in case some of them may die off at a young age. So if I want 3 babies, maybe I will give birth to 5 in case 2 die off. What happened was health conditions, living conditions had improved, so all of them or most of them did not die off. In the end, you got a lot of babies created. Besides, due to traditions from Asian culture and agricultural society, many common people wanted to bear more children to share family burden, to continue family life, to have financial security at old age, because they expect that the children will take care of them, support them when they grow old, things like that. And with that, you have many babies being born. So if I give an example of my parents, because they were part of the generation of post-war baby boom, my father has 11 siblings. My mother has 5 siblings, meaning that my father's side, there are 12 kids. My mother's side, there are 6 kids. And this is sort of the norm at that time, as compared to now. So with a lot of babies born, you have a big increase in population, which the country government has to manage. Having more babies born is not just about having to manage more people in the country. It is also having to manage more people born and bred in the country. You are having more local people now. So the types of public policies and government strategies had to change to fit accordingly. What local people need, want, feel, behave, etc., are quite different from those of the come and go migrants 20 years, 50 years, or 100 years. In lesson 5 and lesson 7, etc., we have mentioned that this change in the profile of the community had led to dramatic consequences on Singapore, be it the place, the people, and policies. So you may want to look back, what are the changes in the needs and demands and rights of the people, and hence what are the corresponding changes in policy making and governance. Most of the population growth came from babies. So if you look at this era here, the number of babies increased by a lot. In between 1947 to 57, we have about 400,000 more people, sorry. And then the next decade, we have about 600,000 more people. It is much more than the peak of migration earlier on. And if you look at migration, it is quite low and not so significant towards this end, because really you have much more population growth due to babies, and the contribution of migration is not that strong. 600K versus 30K, you can feel the difference. Because of this explosion of human beings on the island, it posed a big strain on housing, infrastructure, jobs, etc. at that time, which created a lot of problem or headache to the PAP government to address them. This is just additional data to show that the population was becoming more local within a short time span. So you can compare the data for Chinese and Indians between the change in time. Yeah. So within like how long you see a big change in the profile of the population of local ones. It is understandable that the Malays will be mainly or largely local born since the earlier times. So their percentage tends to be higher as compared to the others right from the start, and then so on and so on. Now we move towards the next era, the era of 1960s, which is another significant turning point. In this era, the Singapore government, led by PAP, decided to reduce births through the introduction of antenatal policies. Because the government was worried about its ability to provide jobs and education if this speed of population growth kept on continuing non-stop strongly. The ultimate goal of the government was to have zero population growth. So to control the number of babies, to slow down the birth rates of people, there was a combination of carrot and stick approaches carried out. So on one hand, there were incentives to encourage people to reduce births. For example, incentives were given to encourage people to go for sterilization. On the other hand, there were penalties imposed on people who gave birth to more babies than what the government preferred. Yeah, so these people may have disadvantages in the application of leave, the amount of fees and taxes payable, the priority in school enrollment for kids, the priority in housing application, etc. Then the Abortion Act was enacted in 1969 and further liberalized to allow more abortions to happen, and hopefully that can also help to reduce births in Singapore. Until today, Singapore has one of the more liberal abortion laws in the world. This is something that is true from the start until now. Towards the early 1980s, the government further advocated eugenics into the picture. I'm not sure if you know what eugenics means. Eugenics is something like the belief of intelligence being genetically inherited. Yeah. So, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew somehow supported this belief that intelligence is mainly genetically inherited, and he supported the belief of breeding of higher quality human beings. Towards this belief, the government started to promote more marriages among university graduates. Whether university graduates should be considered as higher quality human beings, I leave it to you to ponder. Then on the other hand, the government encouraged sterilization for those people who were lower in education and lower in income. Whether these people should be considered as lower quality human beings, I will also leave it to you to ponder. But to be fair to the government, when the government tried to pinpoint at policies like this towards the lower education and lower income people, the concern is not just directed at eugenics. The government was also looking at practical real-life considerations. There was the worry that if these people have too many children, it would worsen their financial burden, and it would prevent the parents from feeding and grooming their children sufficiently. At that time, the issue was that people with more babies, people with a lot of babies, tended to be people of lower income and lower education. So there was this dilemma present. With that, Singapore government went full force in the antenatal drive. There was intense campaigning, so all sorts of slogans coming out. If you look at the slogans here, you can roughly guess what are the angles focused by the government. So the government will tell you 2 is enough. If you have smaller family, brighter future, because you got more resources, pump in on the lesser children. Sterilization, best method for family with what limitation. Second, can wait. You don't go for teenage marriage, you will be rushing to problems, etc. So by reading the slogan, you can roughly know where the government was targeting at in terms of this campaign. The antenatal drive was quite successful to an extent because you can really see a big reduction in births. So from 596K to 233K, quite a big reduction. But 233K is still a very big number. So at that time, there is still significant population growth in Singapore, and almost all this growth is due to babies. So even though you drop to 233K, it is still a big number, and almost all of the population piece was still due to birth, even though it is at a slower pace due to the effects of the government policy. As you can see, from quite a number of decades, migration was at a low end. it will typically just occupy about 5 to 10% of population growth for this time, for this period. This chart is just to show how much fertility rate has fallen during this antenatal drive. Then these numbers are just trying to show even more indication how much birth rate has fallen during this antenatal drive. This table shows the big increase in abortions after the implementation of the Abortion Act and the liberalization of abortion in Singapore. So you can see that by 1985, you have about 24K abortions, which account for more than 1/3 of pregnancies. In other words, for every 2 babies born, you have 1 fetus killed. That was the prevalence of abortion and the impact of abortion at that time. I had a question here saying, what is the impact of this trend and this rampant abortion has on the future decades after? If you are born in 1975, during the antenatal drive, you will be about 30 years old in 2005, you will be about 35 years old in 2010. If you are born in 1985, where you have so many abortions, you will be about 20 years old in 2005 or 35 years old in 2010 and so on. If some of these healthy fetuses manage to survive and grow up, can they help to counter the shortage of manpower during this period of time, since they are at their most energetic and youthful age to do work? Can they help to counter the problem of shortage of babies during these times, because they will be at their most reproductive age to produce babies? These were the times whereby the government complained a lot about having not enough manpower and babies, and they used the deficiency or insufficiency of citizens as a justification for various policies on economy and population. Of course, this is a comment on hindsight. If the fetus is not killed, the parents and the government, the country, would have to be able to raise them out to adulthood in the first place. But can they do so? I think many may be possible to do so. Now we move on to the next decade, next era, which is something very different. So for this period of time, there is a reversal in policy. In the previous era, the government tried to reduce births using antenatal policies. In this era, immediately right after, the government tried to promote births through pro-natal policies. So it's like a 180 reversal of policy directions. This drastic switch in policy was mainly due to the worries on replacement level and aging population. And this drastic switch in policy actually applied to the same generation of parents. So it could be quite confusing for some of them. So imagine that the parents had undergone sterilization during the antenatal drive. Yeah, they would not be able to do more babies in this pronatal drive. So I think from the progressions and challenges in the management of population in Singapore since independence, this may be one of the examples showing that a policy may be affected by many factors, and create many indirect side effects, and the effects will take years or even decades to show its form. Therefore, a government needs to think further and think longer when you want to make decision. Yeah, otherwise when you do things too fast or too much, the imbalance may be far-reaching and you may not realize it until some long time later. The previous era was about antenatal policies, and we have seen that there was a significant drop in births due to antenatal policy. So you can see that the effectiveness of the antenatal policies are quite okay. But when you look at the postnatal policies, these policies have not been creating a big rise or a significant rise in births since their implementations from then until today. These are some possible reasons why the amount of babies cannot be increased by a lot despite intensive or diligent policy efforts. Female education and labor participants are on the rise in Singapore, so you have more women working and engaging in their career. Therefore, they may not pay that much attention, they may not have that much capacity to focus on producing babies and taking care of babies. And besides, Asian men tend to marry down or equal due to culture or esteem or other reasons. Asian women tend to marry up or equal due to culture, security, or other reasons. With more females getting more highly educated and more highly paid, then it will be harder or you can create more difficulty to get more matching marriages under this kind of old school mindset of traditions. People in Singapore are also experiencing higher costs of living. So they may have more financial commitments to cover their daily necessities and to satisfy their personal desires. In order to pay off their expensive housing loans, pay off their daily essentials, and to pay off their fanciful materialistic items, they need more money. Hence, both husband and wife need to work. As compared to last time, in the olden days, usually only the husband goes to work. So with both the husband and wife working, you have more dual income families. These couples may be more tired and more distracted by other things like work and something else. So they may not have the energy and interest to give birth to that many babies as well. Besides, if they are dual income, if both husband and wife are working, they need feasible childcare options since they are not at home. If there is a lack of feasible childcare options, they may not want to give birth to babies, they may give birth to one or less, one or two at most. Besides that, in the overall social trend, there may be a shift in society mindset on family procreation and life. In the past, it was like a natural human life cycle to form families and to give birth to babies at a certain stage of your life. And people also wanted to give birth to more babies to act as financial security so that someone can feed them and support them when they grow old. So in the past, the social duty and social urge to produce babies might be stronger. But nowadays, this type of mindset may not be that prominent as compared to the past because people may have become more independent, they may have different priorities, they may define the meaning of life differently. So they are not so keen or not so urgent or desperate or so tuned to having babies as an automatic process of their life. Just now I said that you have quite a good success in antenatal policies because there was a big drop in births. However, if we look at things in perspective, perhaps not all the babies, not all the fall in babies during the antenatal drive was due to the antenatal drive. Perhaps some of the fall of the babies was due to this change in mindset, this change in social trends. Yeah. So at that time, already people have changed in social mindset. At that time, already you have more female working in the labor market. You already have this concern of cost of living. So during the antenatal drive, the fall of babies may be caused by two angles. One would be the policy by the government. One would be by this social trends. It is just that by the time you reach the 1980s, such trends became more prevalent and more pronounced. So the impact was even larger and it is harder to tone down. On the point at the bottom, it is challenging for the government to intervene in personal household and lifestyle decisions like giving babies, having babies, through a clinical monetary approach from top down. After all, this is about humans, not about machines. Similarly, there was intense campaign by the government to drive the pro-natal policies. So suddenly it is about having 3 or more if you can afford it. Suddenly abortion is not a family planning method. Yeah, so so you can see that the messaging of the government, the angle of the government changed quite substantially between the antenatal drive and the pro-natal drive. If we talk about today, the promotion of birth still continues today. The government is introducing more newer initiatives to fit the current times. In the past, the government focused more on giving money, so giving grants, giving tax rebates, etc. But as time goes by, the government concedes that the government has to work more on the soft side of social support and mindset besides giving money. Therefore, you can see the introduction of other angles. For example, the government started to increase a lot more childcare facilities, and the government stopped the practice of letting private players taking full charge of the childcare sector. In the past, childcare sector is fully driven by private sector. The government did not have a hand in it. But now the government realized that childcare is quite similar to healthcare and quite similar to education. So it's an essential thing of people, and if you want to handle this, you must intervene. So you need to give government childcare services, government childcare funded facilities, etc. The government also started to advocate more family-friendly work arrangements. The government tries to make primary school education more inspiring and less stressful, and hopefully people are more willing to give birth to babies, etc. However, when you want to promote births, it is not simply by, okay, I have not enough babies, so we should do this or that to increase babies. A broader range of fundamental factors affect births, and they need attention. You need to look at the fundamental things, apart from just let us create more babies. For example, the extent of collective responsibility over life matters versus individual responsibility. All along Singapore, government focused a lot on individual responsibility. The extent of collective responsibility determines are involved in caretaking of the children. Where money comes from to take care of children? What values and behaviors are inculcated to children? There is this saying that it takes a village to raise a kid, not just a family. So when you have more collective responsibility in the society, it may be more sustainable and it may be more community spirited. I think Japan may be an example of what we mean by collective responsibility in raising kids. You also have to look at solving or addressing wealth inequality and social mobility. Because this defines how the parents are able to raise the kids and where these kids will end up later when they grow up. Yes, you can create as many babies as you want, but will the babies live with purpose, with dignity, with fairness, with happiness when they grow up? You have to think from the shoes of the babies, not just selfishly about ourselves. Manpower utilization and allocation. You have to consider this because it gives you an idea how many workers and hence how many babies you need to support the economy. The government may think that, oh, I need 3 workers to do this job, so I need to produce 3 babies. But actually, this is because the government is not managing manpower good enough. The government is not maximizing the potential of the human beings. If you have better productivity, if you have better manpower utilization and allocation, maybe only 1 worker is needed for that job, and hence only 1 baby is needed. So the way you calculate how many babies you want also boils down to how you handle manpower. So it's not just about, I want babies, I create more and things like that. This chart is an extension of what we have mentioned just now. So I think if you remember earlier on, there's a slide showing the fall of fertility rate during antenatal drive. So this is an extension of that chart till the postnatal drive. Because the numbers of the chart stop at around 2001, so I have added a newer chart to complement to show you what is happening today. So in terms of today, the fertility rate typically hovers around 1.1, 1.2 for the past 10 years or so. Last year is a bit lower than usual due to this period is due to COVID. Yeah. For Chinese and the overall. If you look at the trend, you can see that the Malays are having a much higher fertility rate than the other groups, and this is on a rising trend, whereas the others are on a falling trend. Fertility rate continues to drop even though birth numbers seem to rise a bit in recent years. This comment is just to tell you that birth rate and fertility rate are 2 different numbers. Yeah. Birth rate refers to the number of live births per 1,000 people of the population. Fertility rate refers to the number of children produced by a woman in her whole lifetime, assuming that she is reproductive during her childbearing age. So it is a bit different. Therefore, it is possible that you can have more birth, but your fertility rate does not increase that much. If you also have a lot more women with childbearing age in the society. Yeah. So for fertility rate, it depends on the number of babies born and also the number of women with childbearing age at that time in the country. So it depends on 2 things. Birth rate is very straightforward. It's just about how many babies are born. Typically, for Singapore the replacement level is set at 2.1 for fertility rate, meaning that hopefully people can produce enough babies at least to replace themselves when they retire and when they die. So if you have a couple, 2 human beings, and if you can give birth to at least 2 or 2.1, right, then you can help to at least replace yourself when you retire and die. When fertility rate goes below replacement level, which is the case for Singapore for many years, the population may not be sufficient for the economy. You may not have enough people to serve the workforce. However, yes, a number of babies affects the manpower supply, but this is only one of the components of the equation. Simply increasing babies will not help much to solve your manpower supply problem if other issues of manpower, resource utilization, and suitability are not adequately addressed. There is limited value in increasing babies if you do not manage manpower well enough, if you do not maximize the use of manpower good enough. If you need 3 babies to do the work of 1 person, you are wasting babies. So you need to consider productivity. Your country needs to have productivity. If your productivity is low, you are wasting your babies no matter how many babies are being created. As for suitability, there is limited value in increasing babies if you do not solve the job mismatch problem, if there is strong job mismatch in the country. If the government creates a lot of jobs on one hand and a lot of babies on the other hand, but the babies and the job do not match, you are just creating more jobless babies. So in order to solve the whole picture, it's not just about creating more human beings by whatever reasons, you also need to look at how you manage manpower that is present. Now we talk more about the migration trend for the current era. As you can see from the earlier tables, there are many decades whereby Singapore had very high population growth due to babies, and the contribution of migration was relatively low, because as I said just now, about 5 to 10% of population growth. So at the point of 1970s, the percentage of non-residents actually turned to the lowest of history. Then from around 1990 onwards, plus minus, Singapore government changed the policy stand and policy direction to have very liberal and rapid introduction of foreign manpower. These are some basis or objectives of such change in policies and the drive in liberal migration. So there was a labor shortage due to the expansion of manufacturing sector, and also due to the reliance on a factor-driven model. As we said just in previous lessons, the reliance on factor-driven model would mean that the government relied a lot on increasing labor growth to create output instead of increasing productivity to increase output. And if your concept and your working model is to act a cow for more work done, definitely you need more human beings. Then this liberal policies in migration was also meant to align with the desire to make Singapore more globally competitive in terms of cost. for the lower end jobs and in terms of capability for the higher end jobs. So by introducing those cheaper foreign workers for the lower end jobs, it can help to bring down the wage cost in Singapore and hence hopefully the overall business cost in Singapore. By introducing the capable talent, foreign talent for the higher end jobs, hopefully Singapore can now pursue roles that the government wants Singapore to serve, but Singapore does not have ready Singaporeans to do the job. So the government may want Singapore to engage in certain roles or certain sectors, but Singaporeans may not be able to handle those roles and sectors. Therefore, foreign import of manpower shall be the solution. As said before, in the earlier times, easier way out and lower hanging fruits have been taken up. So Singapore really has to pay more attention towards building manpower capability, manpower productivity, and product value if you want to be more competitive in the global arena. And if Singapore wants to move towards the innovation-driven stage and also to solve the weakness of lack of local enterprise, then Singapore really has to move more into developing local products, local companies, and local talent. Because of this liberal and rapid introduction of migration, there is a big change in the population growth pattern of Singapore in the current era. So last time in the previous era, natural increase of babies accounted for almost all population increase. But at present years, from 1990 onwards, you can see that babies only account for about 1/3 of the population increase. So this is just a comparison how this trend looks like over a timeline since independence. So if you look at the demarcation, there seems to be two eras within this timeline. So during the first 25 years of Singapore independence, the population profile of Singapore has been quite consistent. So 25 years, 30 years or so, Singapore would have about 90% of population being citizens and the rest being non-citizens. Then for the next 25 years of Singapore independence, you have a period of sharp rise in migration up to about mid-2010s. So because of this, you can see that there's a big change in the proportion of the citizen share. So you have the proportion of citizens fallen quite substantially to about 60% now. Nowadays, in recent years, since the 2010s, there has been some ground opinions that too high reliance on manpower, foreign manpower at a rapid pace may be unsustainable due to the political, economic, and social physical challenges that come with it. So sometimes when you do something, it's not about the issue of how much you do, but it's about how fast you do. So when you do that, if your speed is like that, and your speed is like that, you may reach the same level, but because of the difference in speed, it may have different repercussions. So some measures have been taken by the government in the past years to slow down the addition of new foreigners, such as those mentioned over here. The intention is more to slow down increase and maintain current migration policy. It is not to decrease migration or decrease foreign manpower. Slow down increase and decrease are two different notions. So Singapore government is looking at slowing down increase. Basically, Singapore government wants to keep the current gradient, and do not want the gradient to become much more steeper. In fact, if you look at the absolute population size later on, you can see that there is not much drastic change in foreigner population growth in Singapore over these years. And besides, the government has put in more targeted effort to bring more foreign manpower of desired types after the pandemic due to the excessive outflow of foreigners during the pandemic. We have mentioned this in lesson 9, so you can refer to that part for this discussion. So what are the responses from businesses and bosses on these changes? So you can hear some people complaining, right? They will say they are having not enough manpower, they are having increase in salary costs, etc. And these changes sometimes come at a point whereby their business is not doing very well, or Singapore economy is not doing very well. These complaints can be categorized into two groups. So some of the complaints are really valid. So you have companies facing genuine difficulties due to the changes, and they have difficulties in how to adapt and how to make changes to their models and their operations. Some of the complaints are less valid because the bosses are complacent or reluctant or ignorant that their outdated and unfavorable business practices should not be continued anymore. They should change to something else, more competitive, more sustainable, and more efficient. So the government needs to filter and differentiate the complaints, such that true concerns of the bosses can be addressed and help can be given. But on the other hand, those non-competitive companies needed to be pushed and forced to make changes. Yeah. So you need to be able to decipher and not just say yes to everyone or say no to everyone. With that, we shall take a short break. We'll come back around 7:55. Thank you.
I've been having a lot of things. A little bit more lah. Nice genetics. It's not. I quit my job.
When
Huh?
When me?
Me?
When you quit?
Start of the year. I very got stress.
That time I meet you. Really quit already.
When?
Jen. Before Jen, yeah. No, Jen.
I create fat.
You keep.
STM.
Yeah. But obviously. I'm just putting the.
Which is some new AI thing.
Yeah.
No, you know.
Of course.
It's Bing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Microsoft. What's it called again? This thing, right?
This Microsoft uses the.
Not by Microsoft,
It's Microsoft.
but it's Bing.
Yeah lah. You know Google, right? Microsoft also have their own
By using the Google part.
useless.
Why?
I don't like it.
Wrong.
Like very limited. They only give you like three answer only. Right?
But
When you
I
ask for
like
something, they only give three.
But I like
This one is ChatGPT, but
4 or 5.
Huh?
GPT-4.
GPT-4. I think you can choose. But they put it as. Oh, okay, let's see here. They put different.
Oh, okay, maybe I
But
try.
this is like GPT-4. Yeah. Better. At least can search for me. It's not very hard.
Your other mod is what?
The what?
Your other mod.
Some
It's 2, right?
Some
Public speaking.
quantitative data stuff.
Qualitative data analysis.
Yeah. You do that already.
Do already. I'm doing one global economics one.
You which year?
Second.
Second year.
Global economics.
Hey, you done ethics already? Haven't?
I know you're doing now. Some of the engineering I know they're doing now. Or doing next sem.
Maybe next sem.
Ethics.
Also,
Ethics actually you have to write a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, then group work 5
But have
people.
to do it.
Have to do. I do year 1. Yeah, then year 1.
Oh, you do year one.
Yeah, together. Then group we all do together. We also this project also. We also do it together.
No wonder. Huh?
We are done with
The what?
assignment 2.
I need to finalize. You finish already?
Same we also
Yeah.
content is like your watching here. Your good mix
Recorded. Yeah. Oh, good. Wow, thankful for this. I lazy look through the notes.
It's not the same last time teach already.
I know. I just lazy to think one.
What's the Alamak.
No need to think so much. No need to think so much. It's okay. I can just copy all the questions. It's fine. No problem. Easy. Got 100 questions now. Very sick there. It's freaking 3 hours. My god. It's very lazy.
And are you doing all this?
Huh?
Are you doing all this?
What?
Are you doing all this at your job?
Technically, yes. It's so stupid. Why you sit back down there? Macam poly sia. Like poly sia. The first, the second row and third row.
No, they usually see here.
Oh, okay. Oops, sorry.
I think
They
kind of choke already.
Yeah, kena sorry.
They usually see here.
Yeah. Sorry, man.
It's not you.
population.
Yeah, help lah.
I will help.
Chinese 0.87.
Yes, you say Malay power
But Malay,
1.8.
the compared to Chinese, it's only like 20%.
1,000 people.
Even your help, right? Still hard to pull up.
The bell curve.
Yeah, still hard lah. The Chinese one kids.
Intermarriage.
Yeah lah.
You find a Malay girlfriend. Then you put Chinese.
I have to put on.
Why?
I have
Oh, you need to put on.
You tell me
Maybe some of them they don't mind. You never know.
the parents might.
Maybe some
Is it a
of
parents
them-
thing? I don't know.
I don't know whether the parents mind or not. Potong Sounds so funny, sir. I hope you guys are not listening. I need to listen again. Just I play music. Like intermission. Curious. Sekiranya dia berskip. Doesn't matter.
You propose right?
The what?
You propose right?
Still haven't seen my invitation.
You invite me lah. I give you a big ang pao.
Bodoh lah.
You invite me. Wow.
None of our classmates here
Oh, you gonna invite DP?
I don't know. Most I mean Rebecca, you, Leah of course. Oh, then some of the SCG people.
Yeah, you still can talk to her.
Hmm?
You still can talk to her.
Yeah, talk to her.
How's she doing?
I think she's doing okay. Got new boyfriend now.
I thought always different.
No, never change. Only the time she break up then after that long period of singleness. And I think only like last week or last week. It's your turn.
You know what happened? Career first, then
Career first. Education.
but actually then
He got a lot SNM. Career. The freshie coming in. So have you found your deal? I still remember like deal. Damn. I remember what's
I
the
always mix with all the people who sing to us. I joined some like club or something.
club.
Shit.
Since you're not working, you join all the school activities. Okay, right? Just join us. Hi, I'm from Skill. Which
Everybody-
family are you from? I'm from Skill.
Skill.
What is Skill? Yeah. You say College of Design and Engineering. Actually, it's not right. Fake it till you make it.
Hey, your job stable. Or you want to change?
The job now all very uncertain.
Manufacturing. Yeah, manufacturing.
R&D,
R&D okay lah, not manufacturing.
not really, not so good.
It's a semicon.
R&D, mine is under year stuff.
Okay, let us continue.
Not really government, but stable. Not so good also. R&D.
The
Okay
lessons
lah,
of
stable.
population.
Economy-
So we shall
economy not so
talk
good.
about one aspect of ethnicity. This exercise.
Okay. Okay,
This is something that has invited certain discussion in recent times. The question says, in Singapore, what is the percentage of citizen marriages solemnized that are inter-ethnic in nature since 2011? So So from 2011 up to about last year or the previous year, what is the percentage of citizen marriages solemnized that are inter-ethnic in nature? Inter-ethnic means that the marriage is between two people of different ethnic groups. So people of two different ethnic groups decide to get married together. So what do you think is the possible percentage for Singapore for the past 10 years or so? So
27%.
how many of you think that is 5%? 11%? 18%?
Make it 27. Let's go.
27%? So confident. The answer is 18. Actually, you're not very far off because what happened was that
We
there
never get
was
the
some
stats up to date.
redefinition of
Yeah, now
ethnicity
confirm change.
and
Right.
readjustment of data
I
by the
contributing also.
government last year. So if you look at past reports of similar parameters, they will report the numbers to be around 21-22%. But now the government has some way of reclassifying ethnicity. So what are considered same ethnicity, right? So due to the redefinition, I think from last year onwards, the number dropped a bit. But be it 18 or 22, it's just an estimation. You can roughly see that it's around 1 in 5, right? That is the rough trend. This is a significant increase because the percentage was just about 7% in 1990. So I think with the trend coming to this this percentage, it may show that more Singaporeans are looking beyond racial lines and cultural barriers when it comes to finding a life partner. There may be more integration between ethnic groups in Singapore in some sense because of this trend. But what I want to highlight is something else related to inter-ethnic marriages. When you have more and more inter-ethnic marriages, and these couples reproduce, they will give birth to mixed blood children, right? And the proportion will not be small because now it's around 1 in 5. I think soon it may be 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 times to come. And you would have more and more mixed blood children produced in this country. With that, public policy may have to adjust to fit this trend. I'm not sure if you know, Singapore government traditionally would use certain parameter or certain method to classify people based on ethnic groups. So the CMIO classification is applied in Singapore. CMIO refers to how the government group people into Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others. This classification is commonly used in areas like statistics collection, in school enrollment, in housing application, in presidential and parliamentary elections, etc. So, one question to ponder is how to classify mixed blood children, and hence how to treat them. Because treatment is affected by classification in Singapore when it comes to policy making. Currently, mixed blood children have the choice to indicate their ethnicity on their IC as XY or YX based on their preferences, so as to reflect their double origin. However, administratively, the government tends to use the first ethnic group as the basis in various government processes. Otherwise, there will be hundreds of permutations to handle because so many ABs, XY, then ZZ, then all those things, right? The government will be messy in the database. So So to make it simple, yes, to show the equality and equity in indicating your real ethnicity, but on the back end, various processors tend to use your first indicated group as the group for processing. Whatever the case, it shall not be good if mixed blood children are overly unfairly disadvantaged or overly unfairly advantaged because of their parentage. Yeah, so that is one to look at because you have two things to choose from. Then the other question to ponder would be how to define ethnicity in future. Should it by descent, by blood, by language, by religion, by culture, or by what? I think for Singapore-wise, in recent years, as seen in the elections, a new form of classification or definition has arisen, such that a person can be considered as part of this ethnic group if the people from this ethnic group accept him or her as one of them. So ethnicity now can also be defined by community acceptance. I think moving forward, it will be harder to set a clear-cut definition of ethnicity with more and more integration happening. So ultimately, all these points voices down to the point that whatever criteria to classify people may be more artificial and harder to enforce in times to come. We have to ensure that whatever criteria used are realistic. We have to ensure that whatever criteria used do not cause unnecessary division and exclusion of people. We don't try to segregate and divide and classify people for the sake of doing so. There must be some nice and helpful, useful reason. And I think as time goes by, it is natural that Singapore, like any society, may have more and more integration and mixture of people in the society. So Singapore has to find her own ways to decide how to view people and how to manage people and how to classify people. Moving back to the lesson, the first part of the lesson highlights certain key features of different era when it comes to population trend. So this is just a brief summary of what is mentioned. You can look through it. Now we shall move on to talk about some current issues. And aging population is certainly an issue of concern. In Singapore, there is this estimate that age dependency ratio would be increasing significantly with time. So this is an estimate that by 2030, this would be the dependency ratio. So age dependency ratio is something like this line. So this line, this title head, is the definition of dependency ratio here. So please do not get confused with that dependency ratio related to the quota for foreign workers. They are two different things. They are all called dependency ratio, but they mean different things. When we talk about dependency ratio in population, we are not referring to the quota for foreign workers in Singapore. We are referring to the number of dependents per 100 working age citizens. In the earlier years of Singapore, the high dependency ratio is mainly due to the big number of young children. Then in coming years to come, the dependency ratio is likely due to the presence of more and more old people. Dependence can cover young children and old people. So basically, whoever being reliant or dependent on others to survive. So when we talk about dependence, it can cover young children, it can cover old people. Since they lack income and they most probably need support from others for subsistence. In relation, you can see two types of sandwich generations being created in Singapore today. The first type of sandwich generation should be quite familiar to you. It refers to the group of young people who have to take care of their young kids and their old parents at the same time. So they feel the pressure of life and they are stretched from both ends, physically and financially. However, in Singapore-wise, there is this emergence of another set of sandwich generation, which requires more attention because there is more problem to it. This is the sandwich generation of people who are old, having to take care of their parents who are even much older, in the age of 80s and 90s. This generation is created mainly because the parents do not expect to live until so old. This is not something that would happen in the olden days. So the parents did not expect to live until so old. So the families lack preparation beforehand to deal with the presence of the parents now. They may not have enough budget, they may not have enough strength, they may not have enough provisions to cater to this issue. These people have more challenging situation because they themselves are either retired or they are retiring soon. They may need people to support them, but now they still have to support even older parents at the same time. How can they do so? People in the 70s, 80s, 90s come from the olden times. And many of them are lower in education and lower in income. So they do not have much savings, given their low income. If they are low income, they do not have enough savings to survive themselves for retirement. How can they have enough money to take care of the even older parents that are not dead yet, who are not dead yet? And these people also have low CPF funds. This is because their income is low, and also because CPF schemes like MediSave only came out when they were quite old. So by the time schemes like MediSave or MediShield or whatever enhancements were created, these people may be in their 70s or 60s already. There is no time for them to accumulate such savings to look after their old age. So they are having financial issues. Financial terms aside, there is also constraint physically and psychologically. People at this age may be weak themselves, may be sick themselves. They may need help and support from others. They may not have the capacity and the energy to look after older parents who are weak and incapacitated. So this would be a problem of Singapore, I would think, more dangerous than this conventional sandwich generation. There is also another set of ratio called old age support ratio, which also gives this big similar trend as the one of the previous slide. So old age support ratio is defined by this. It basically says that you would have less working adult per unit of older people. So if you look at the ratio earlier on and the ratio here, in general, it is trying to say that each elderly person has a smaller number of working adults to support him or her. In other words, the workforce and society may have more burden in taking care of dependents in future, especially the elderly. However, the actual burden may be lesser than estimated if we consider the financial savings and economic activities of the old people. Normally, when analysts calculate these numbers and these numbers, it is on the assumption that the dependents are fully dependent. They are fully dependent on the working age adult to support them, to feed them, to take care of them. But this may not be the case for some old people now. So they may have financial means, they may have savings, they may have earnings to feed themselves, and perhaps even feed their kids who are young working adults. These people have financial savings, and they may have economic activity, they may not be lying flat doing nothing at home. When you consider old people who are more self-sufficient, if you consider old people who have more financial stability, then perhaps it can reduce the burden by significant amount. But whatever the case, it is a confirmed trend that Singapore is going to have a lot more old people. As you can see here, almost 20% of citizens today are 65 years old or above, which is quite a lot. About 1/3 of citizens in Singapore, 55 years or above. Only about 1/5 of citizens being less than 20 years old. So you would definitely have much more old people in Singapore now. And how can you handle this trend? It is a challenge and an important factor to consider for the government and the country at large. Aging population increases social needs in supporting higher percentage of dependents, especially the old people. When we say that there's a need to support, the need would cover many aspects. It's not just about how to cover their living costs and healthcare costs, etc. When you have a growing aging population, you also have to cover other aspects, like to have relevant types of healthcare services, like old age disease. You need to have relevant infrastructure, like the elder-friendly facilities. You need to have conducive CPF and social security. You need to have communication understandable by old people. You need to have enough activities to let retirees spend their time. You need to take care of their emotional well-being. So when we say about social need, it's not just money, it's about the whole package of how they live their life from morning till night. Yeah, so it's not just the money component. When you have an aging population, it may create higher costs for training and restructuring of elder or older workers, because it may take more time and effort to retrain older workers to fit new jobs, new roles. Besides, the workplace may have to be refurbished or be renovated to fit the characteristics of old people, to be more elder friendly. This requires money as well. Aging population results in a smaller workforce because of the smaller number of energetic young working adults. This may potentially affect output of the country. I put in the word potentially because it should not be a definitive statement. It really depends on how the country manages manpower and employment. In the attempt to address aging population, a country may try to write on other sources of labor to compensate the reduced size of workforce. Repercussions may set in if the inflow or outflow of foreign manpower is imbalanced in whatever way. Too much, too little, too fast, too slow. These charts are population pyramids that may reflect the profile of Singapore over the years. I'm not sure if you remember what population pyramids are from your high school days. So it tries to show the proportion of people present in different age groups. So each level represents one age group, and then left side represents males and left side represents females. So Singapore is somewhere here now in terms of profile. This is considered the golden era for a country in population profile. When you are like that in population profile, it means that most of your people are young, energetic, working adults. Then you also have quite a lot of young children. You do not have a lot of old people. So this is like the golden era. So for Singapore, why the golden era happened around 1990? This profile is more typical of the early developing country. This profile is more typical of a more developed country. We need to be mindful that the current aging population faced by Singapore is not just due to the general trend of aging. It is also due to the exceptional event of post-war baby boom. Due to this post-war baby boom, you have this sudden big amount of babies being produced. So if you look at the chart here, where would they appear on this stage? So for this stage, the baby boomers will be somewhere here, then they're somewhere here, and then they're somewhere here. So they are the ones who contributed to the golden era of Singapore at this point in the 1990s. So and then they'll move around here. So now in Singapore-wise, they have grown to the older age tiers. Since I say that the baby boom contributes a lot to the general profile of the population now, it means that there will be another significant change in population profile after these people die off. You got a sudden influx of this big amount of human beings. They go by many years, and then when they die off, it will cause a big change. So the country needs to be mindful of what will happen after they die off. Otherwise, your policies may end up overdoing something or underdoing something. We need to be aware that this factor is not just due to the general process of aging. There are other components contributing to it. In face of these issues, the government currently has this current economic strategy to address the changes in demographics. It is a multi-pronged, multi-faceted strategy. First, the government tries to restructure businesses and retrain workforce. So that's why we have mentioned that there's more promotion of productivity, technology, innovation, and continual learning. I mentioned before that for this to work, the mindset of the bosses and the mindset of the workers must change. They must be aware that their previous practices may harm their jobs or may harm their business. They must be willing to make changes. They must be willing to go for training as workers. The bosses must be willing to change their practices and redesign jobs, etc. Then the bosses must also be willing to hire people who are adequately trained and give some chance to those people who may be freshies of that sector or who may be a bit old in public opinion. The next angle will be to add and retain residents in the workforce. So if your workforce is stagnating in size or maybe reducing in size, then you try to retain and the current people as much as possible. You try to bring back those going out as much as possible. So the government is trying to let the older people to work longer so that they can contribute more to the economy for a longer time. Besides, since the older people have to live longer, they also need income to survive the longer life. With that,
the government tries to increase retirement age and re-employment age. The government tries to give incentives to encourage old people to work, and also give incentives to encourage bosses to hire old people. The other group of people being targeted for retention would be young educated women who become homemakers. These people are professionals in their own fields before they resign and take care of their children. Yeah, so if they can come back to contribute to the economy, it would be very valuable due to their capabilities. Therefore, now there is some more effort in attracting them and in providing some more flexible work arrangements, etc. Lastly, of course, there is also this use of calibrated migration and foreign manpower, especially for the type of people and the type of sectors in higher demand. The government has set up an interministerial committee on aging in order to better coordinate these various aspects of aging, such as those mentioned over here. Aging covers various aspects, and all these aspects are interrelated. Therefore, policies and strategies and operations may work better if the different ministries can work together more closely. For example, job opportunities and skills learning are definitely related. Healthcare, housing, transport are the key cost items for old people. Then if you want to control costs, they have to be considered together. If you want the old people to have social inclusion and healthy retirement, how you design public amenities and public transport and public housing would matter. So everything should be viewed in a more holistic manner. On the other hand, we also have to shift mentalities and look at other angles when it comes to solving or addressing aging population. We cannot simply just try to handle the number of births and number of headcounts. We should also look at other things like the extension of life expectancy. There is a limit to how far conventional parameters can be raised in Singapore. So you cannot rely on the thought that, now we have more old people, so I must have more babies in order to balance off. If you only rely on this idea, you'll keep on adding babies because you keep on having old people and the old people do not die off. You may solve aging population in some sense, but you may end up having overpopulation, which is another problem that opens up another can of worms. So it's not just I need more this, I need more this. The problem of this issue now is that we not only have old people, they are going to live very long. So you cannot just use the replacement level idea to solve this issue. Just now we have said that based on the concept of replacement level, you need to produce at least enough people to replace yourself when you retire and you die. So you need to give birth to enough babies. But these old people will not die off so soon. They will coexist with all of us for a very, very long time. So while you give birth to many babies, you must also consider these old people who are existing for a very long time, and how do you solve their existence? We have to look at how to manage people with longer life expectancies. How to let them live their longer life and survive their longer life. Much of the existing culture system, finances, etc. are designed for the past norms in life expectancy, not the current norms. So in the past, in the ancient times, 500, 600 years ago, 40 or 50 years old is considered old. Then now maybe 60 or 70 years old is considered old. what will it be in future? Is it that 80 or 90 years old is considerable? We would not know. But it shows that we need to constantly redefine what it means by old people, especially the definition of old workers, so that you can have enough people in your workforce. And like I said just now, these old people are living longer. They also need money to survive their longer life. So they need a longer employment period to survive their longer life. Think about it. Most of us start work around 21 or 25 years old, depending on situation. The common retirement age in Singapore is 65, but some of us may want to retire in earlier. So let's say you want to retire around 55 to 65, but you will only die around 85 and 90 years old. Do you have enough money to live until your death? So does many Singaporeans have the ability to do so? By doing so, it means that the amount of money you earn in 30 years is enough to cover your 60 years life. Can this be accomplished by many Singaporeans today, many people today? Some people may be able to do so because of their strong financial wealth and or their short financial planning, but I think most people cannot. You earn for 30 years and then you shake leg for 30 years, not very easy for many people. So you need to consider how to survive the remaining 30 years. In financial terms, how to find the money, be it from work or from savings or from investment or from social security or from whatever sense. We have to think of how to get enough financial support to cover people due to their longer lifespan. In other terms, we also need to think about how to give them decent health and decent quality of living to last their final years in age. As shown by a recent study, many Singaporeans today live a higher percentage of their lives in poor health than Singaporeans in the past. So it is no point living longer if your quality of life is not better off. So if you live longer, you need to make sure that this person can live with dignity and with comfort and with ease. So we have to consider how to enable survival of longer life expectancy in different angles. About working in economy or contributing to economy, actually it is not a must for elderly people to be a former worker in the labor market in order to contribute to the economy and be productive. There can be other ways. For example, I think many grandparents are looking after their grandchildren. This role is often not counted as a job in the economy, in the labor market, but they're actually doing the work of babysitters, doing the work of tutors, etc. Perhaps with a lower cost or with a zero cost. So they can contribute in some way, in some sense. Intergeneration exchanges of cash just means the financial contribution of old people to pay off family expenses. It just wants to say that the old people may have the economic means and the financial means to pay off expenses and to have financial stability. To repeat my previous point just now, when you want to stay old, you must think about how to let the people have active aging. Being old and having a less fruitful life would have limited impact, limited value. Yeah. Okay. So now we shall move on to the part of crunching some data to have more understanding of the current profile of the Singapore population. So this is a very good slide. From this slide, actually, I can see a lot of things. Let me check. So before I start, I just want to highlight the key definition. So this maroon line reflects total population size in absolute numbers. Then this brown line refers to PRs. This light green line refers to non-PR foreigners. This line is a summation of this and this. So this green line can represent all non-citizens. Then this blue line represents citizens. So what can we talk about for this chart? First thing, you can look at the total population change. So as you can see, the total population has been increasing all over the years, but the speed differs with time. So in the earlier first 25 years of independence or so, the increase in total population is more gradual and more steady. From 1990 plus minus onwards, you see a much bigger change in the gradient. The gradient becomes steeper, which means the rate of population increase becomes faster. Then this rate is quite consistent, as you can see, minus the one-off change due to specific episodes. With this, it is about adding 1 million people per 10 years, as we said at the start. Then if you look at citizens, the number of citizens have been increasing gradually and in a rather stable rate, so the chart has not changed a lot, and the gradient is quite similar. If you look at the PRs, the numbers for PRs are also quite stable. Then when you see a flat line here, it does not mean that we have no increase in PRs. No, in actual fact, we have continuous increase in PRs every year, about 30K plus, depending on year. This steady number, this steady horizontal line is because there is this continuous addition of new PRs and this continuous conversion of PRs to citizens. So how many in, how many will go out. So in the end, you will have a quite a steady state. If the change in citizens number is very slow and steady, same for PRs, this means that the big increase, the strong increase in population for Singapore is mainly due to the increase in non-PR foreigners. And you can actually see that the pattern for this line and the pattern for this line is quite similar. They increase at around the same time, they change around the same time. So wherever there is changes here, the pattern is quite similar to the pattern, the changes over here. Then from this particular part, you can see that there is a sharp increase in population number. So it actually coincides with the previous slide 6 during this era, where you have a sharp increase in growth rate, and this is where you have the sharp increase in population size in absolute numbers. As I said just now, when you have a big change in population at a fast rate, the country has to adjust rapidly when it comes to infrastructure, consumption, job landscape, people psychology, etc. And some things like infrastructure and psychology cannot be changed overnight. Due to this sharp increase during this period for a couple of years, some Singaporeans had developed certain discontent over what is happening to the population. They may not know the data They may not know the numbers, they may not know the details, but they somehow felt some effect from what they see and experience in real life, and then they come up with all kinds of interpretations and all kinds of perspectives. When it comes to drop in population, as I said, during the whole period from independence until today, there are only 3 instances whereby Singapore has population falls. You have a small dip around here during the first recession of Singapore. You have some dip here during SARS. You have a big dip here during COVID-19 pandemic. We have said before that wherever you have population falls or population rise in a big amount or substantial amount, it is really mainly due to the change in foreigner numbers. When times are good, more foreigners come in for jobs. When times are bad, more foreigners are leaving Singapore, less foreigners are coming to Singapore due to the absence of good opportunities. So you will see a change as a direct mention. For those who may come in late, I mentioned earlier on at the start of the lesson that the government wants this kind of instability and volatility because they want flexibility in manpower supply. When they want a lot of manpower now, during the good times, they can add manpower very quickly by using foreign import manpower. When they want to reduce manpower quickly, during bad times, they can remove foreign manpower quickly in this sense. During dips in population, we said that there are global economic downturns. During global economic downturns, foreigners may leave because Singapore is not that a nice place to find jobs. But citizens are less mobile in this respect because if they are retrenched, they are most likely to stay on in Singapore to find a job or to survive through. So even you have bad times, you can see that the lines will not change that much. Another thing to look at would be this dotted vertical lines mentioned here. It is common for us to look at the effect of an economic event on population 1 year after the event. So you can see that I say year after Asian financial crisis, year after, year after, year after. Why is this so? Because the full effect of the event would not appear so fast. It takes time to penetrate to the labor market and the population profile. For example, during economic downturn, bosses will not fire people immediately. They will struggle for some months and then they see how it happens and then they decide their future movements. So even though at this date, at this time, you are having a strong, terrible economic downturn, the change in labor market will take some months or even a year to really manifest. Similarly, during economic recovery, bosses would not start hiring immediately in day one. They may slowly get back on track. They may observe the situation to see whether really I need workers in the long run. So the effect of economic event on labor market and population profile normally takes about 1 year or even more to see the consequence. COVID-19 is an exception because the effect is too fast and too big due to the worldwide lockdown and worldwide safe distancing measures. But typically for most cases, we will look at 1 year after. Okay, I shall talk about it now. We shall talk about GE 2011 now. GE 2011 is a significant event because this is when the ruling party did not perform very well for the first time. The election results were quite surprising and different from the past. You can look through if you want to. I think those who are older in age may know, but those who are younger may not know. Yeah, I don't know your age profile. During this election, during this period, there was quite strong discontent on livelihood issues and infrastructure issues, among other things. Part of this discontent was associated with immigration policy. Opposite to what many people think, Singapore government actually did not really change the migration policy by a lot after GE11, even though it had suffered a certain loss in votes and seats. So if you look at GE11 here, year after GE11, you can see that the increase in foreign manpower has not really changed significantly. It's going back to the usual way. As mentioned in an earlier slide, the government really wants to maintain the existing foreign migration policy. They may want to slow down the increase, but they will not want to decrease manpower from foreign sources. So the change is still, no matter what people complain, because some people may say, oh, after the election, right, we have less foreign workers or whatever. Not the case, yeah. So life is still going on as usual. You see some plateauing in recent years. That is more because of several global economic downturns coming one after the other. So when you have weak economy in Singapore, you will have less foreigners in Singapore. COVID, no need to say, it is definitely due to a global event, and then the drop is also due to global issue, not Singapore problem, not Singapore policy. Another thing that we can look at would be those words that I've highlighted here. I've mentioned in an earlier slide as well. So if you can see, for many years, the first 25 years of independence, the vast majority of the population is made up of citizens. But due to the current liberal and rapid introduction of migration, now you would have about 60% of the population being citizens. I have included numbers for 2019 because this is something pre-COVID, so this will be something more representative of general trend. In 2022, we are still in the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic, so we have not really go back to the usual trend yet. What else can I say? So now I can talk about this part. Because of the migration profile of Singapore, likely less than 15% of population now is born in Singapore. This is a rare case. Examples of other countries of same predicament would be UAE and Qatar, but they are like that for some other reasons, not so similar to Singapore. Less than half of the population in Singapore now is likely local born. After you consider the number of foreigners in Singapore, after you consider the number of new citizens in Singapore, after you consider the number of naturalized citizens who have migrated to Singapore long time ago, maybe before, just after independence, like my grandparents. The last group of people who have migrated to Singapore long time ago, they are likely to cover a very small number because most of them have already passed away. Besides, these people have spent almost all their lives in Singapore and they are key players contributing to the independence and nation building of Singapore. So they are like Singaporeans and they should be called Singaporeans. So now most of the foreign-born people would be the new citizens from recent introduction and also the typical non-PR foreigners. To put this number into context, let us compare this number with other countries. So I have some choices here, and Singapore is in this category. So let us compare with US first. US has a lot of migrants since her early days. Long ago, the whites from Europe moved to US, the blacks from Africa involuntarily moved to US due to slavery, etc. Then you also have people from nearby Latin America moving to US. Nowadays, the world has become more globalized. More and more types of people are moving to US. So as of now, US has the largest number of immigrants in the world. Some Americans are quite uncomfortable with this extent of immigration due to the effects on their lives. So many of them start to support the populist politicians who campaign against immigration policy. And therefore, you have people like Donald Trump being elected to office. So under this backdrop, what do you think is the percentage for US? For US, what is the percentage of people in US who are local born? Make a guess. Who think that is A? Who think that's B? Who think that's C? Who think that's D? Who thinks E? I already say this one very bad. We
Just
are
put-
the very Okay,
US mah.
the answer is A. In fact, higher end of it, 86%.
Wow. Serious?
Let us look at UK now. UK also received many immigrants. Currently, I think more from Eastern Europe and also India. There is also growing citizen discontent of immigration, causing a strain in housing, in healthcare, and in other key services. More British find it hard to get affordable housing. British healthcare system is bursting. Social cohesion is also an issue. So immigration is one of the factors, it's not the only factor. It is one of the factors that caused UK people to vote for Brexit in 2016. So what do you think is the percentage of people of UK? A, B, C, D, E don't need, Same, A, around 86%. We shall move on to somewhere we are more familiar and we are closer to Australia. Many Singaporeans and many Malaysians like to study in Australia or even migrate to Australia. Australia is also a popular destination for Asians to get college education. Australia is sort of a migrant society right from the start, although Australia has her own native groups, but many British moved to Australia in the earlier centuries, and Australia was also used by the British to house prisoners from different places during colonial rule. Nowadays, more and more people are moving to Australia, especially Asians. So I think the current status would be that UK, China, and India are the top sources of foreigners from Australia. And with that, there is also growing discontent against immigrants, especially some racist or anti-Asian sentiments growing in some people. Now, many Australians are questioning whether the speed of immigration is accelerating too fast. And what do you think Australia falls under? A. Got tricked by B. B. C. D. So more of you chose C and D. answer is around 71%. So if you look at this sentiments, what your perception is and what the situation is in real life, it is necessary to remind you of something. These countries are large. So their global cities may have a lot of foreigners, but there are other places in the country may still be dominated by citizens. So when we average out the numbers, this would be the figures. If you tell me that the global cities like New York or London have lower percentages, I will believe you because global cities will have much more foreigners. This also brings upon another headache or issue faced by Singapore, which is inborn and hard to avoid. Other countries have global cities. So as I said, you may have a lot of foreigners inside the global city, but in general or across the board for the country, this would be the profile. But Singapore is a country and also a global city. So she always has to face this dilemma on how to fulfill the roles of a global city and how to fulfill the roles of a country at the same time. Some of these roles clash. When you want to be a global city, sometimes it clashes with the roles as a country and vice versa. It is more challenging for Singapore to manage locals and foreigners in Singapore as compared to other countries because the locals and foreigners in Singapore are in more similar numbers. They exist in more similar numbers. And the locals and foreigners in Singapore takes up quite similar shares of the economy, about 50-50%. So on one hand, Singapore wants to be the transit point and economic hub of the world. On the other hand, Singapore has to take care of the well-being of citizens. Sometimes a bit hard to manage between the both. And out of curiosity, what do you think is the percentage of New York and London? They are about the same. A, B, okay, C, D. 63. Still much more than Singapore. Singapore less than 50 only. So how globalized cities are still not as globalized as us. So now we shall move on to talk about some challenges faced by Singapore due to this population surge. This surge. Yeah. To achieve this surge and to sustain this surge and to endure this surge, what are the challenges? You can divide them to physical angles, social angles, and also economic angles. So for the case of physical sense, the government would have challenge in making sure that the infrastructure grow in pace with population growth. Otherwise, your infrastructure is not able to feed the current population size, which is the case for some years, sometime in the history of Singapore not too long ago. This requires the accurate or advanced forecasting of resource requirements and thresholds. This requires punctual completion of construction in time. And I've said just now before, infrastructure is not something that you can create 1 day, 2 days, or 1 month. You suddenly need to feed so many people in the MRT. You need time to build the MRT line. So you need to foresee how many people you want to have, and then how to feed the infrastructure accordingly. However, if your population increases too high, too fast, then it won't be difficult. So the different ministries have to coordinate between themselves better. Otherwise, the ministries involved in population may be going one direction. The ministries involving in infrastructure may be moving towards another direction without realizing. It's not long ago, some people have suggested that Singapore should have 7 million people or even 10 million people to continue her prosperity. And then you have debates from both ends. I would say that the target number is not important. It can be 7 million, 10 million, or whatever million. That is not important. Whatever target number chosen by the government, it is worth considering, worth exploring, provided that the government has clear and useful objectives, provided that the government has sufficient and suitable provisions, provided that the government has the ability to handle the trade-off skillfully. Then when it comes to social angles, these are some things that we have to deal with due to the population change. With the population growing by a lot, the diversity of the population also grow by a lot. Now you have more and more types of people present in the country. It is not easy to manage a diverse group of people. Different people want different things, like different things, behave in different ways. You cannot use one policy to handle everyone. One size fits all policy is very difficult to use. And when you talk about diversity, it's not just about both origins and ethnicity. It can be about other things like age group, social economic status, life outlooks, etc. In relation, difficulty in holding the social fabric together. Social stability is crucial so as to prevent the society from breaking up, from being divided. We have mentioned about the growing inequality in Singapore due to the change in population profile. When we try to solve inequality, we should not just care about disadvantaged Singaporeans, we should also look at the disadvantaged foreigners, because all of us live on the same land. Ill effects felt by one group can cascade to the other groups, just as what we have seen how housing problems of migrant workers have aggravated the spread of COVID-19 for everyone. Besides, foreigners are also humans like us. So there should not be differentiation of higher being, lower being, outer being, and inner being. With Singapore having such a highly globalized population, and with Singapore trying to have such highly globalized range of interests, how can Singapore maintain this sense of national identity among citizens? It would be challenging. The challenge is mainly because there are not many citizens in the country, and also there is no strong binding spirit present that can really manifest in the country. It is not so useful in building national identity when you just have some slogans being heard by some citizens, or you have some events only attended by some citizens. It has to go much deeper and further. When you have population profile in the way Singapore practices, we also have to look at how to restructure businesses and economy. A lot of this increasing in population is due to the reliance on vector-driven model. How can we pull ourselves away from this vector-driven model and reduce the negative impact of this model on different things like we have mentioned over here in other lessons? It has problems on productivity, technology and innovation progress, wage growth of poor people, job sophistication, etc. And when you look at having more people, are they fit to do the jobs that we want them to do, or can we provide the jobs that they want to do? So it is also about designing manpower for jobs and vice versa, therefore pinpointing at the solution of job mismatch. We need to find jobs that people can do and want to do, and we need to find workers to fit the jobs that we want to create. Last but not least, on the point on national identity, I just want to mention the part that in order to have national identity, you need certain collective memory, experience, values and goals. So in social sense, how do you create this sense of harmonious and togetherness under this backdrop of population profile? Some people say that the economy can grow better and grow more if we have more people. It really depends. It does not apply to all cases. It depends on what is your profile of population, what sectors are you targeting at, what is your threshold in capacity. Having more people for economy may be good when it comes to economies of scale and agglomeration. Agglomeration means to have resources, people, and activities all clustering together at one place. Agglomeration can help to raise output, can build networks, can improve sharing of resources and knowledge through the web of interactions with everyone together in one place, and through the economy of skills due to everyone gathering at one place. So it is more beneficial for industries of this kind, because they want to be, you want everyone to be able to be together, to share ideas, swap ideas, to collaborate, so on and so forth. So if you look at Silicon Valley, it's an example of the use of such economies of scale and agglomeration. This kind of industry can best use and best capitalize the advantages mentioned here. In Silicon Valley, you will have the technology giants, technology startups, you have the venture capitalists, the banks, the law firms, the IP firms, the prototyping shops, the universities, everyone together, so that they can work closely and they can help each other towards the developing of that high-end, high-skill kind of products. It is not so useful for industry that focus on the low-cost, labor-intensive model, because it only perpetuates the habit of adding headcount for more work done and discourages improvement of business models. Since we are at the topic of population, I cannot say nothing about the population white paper, so I'll just give a quick comment on this part. The population white paper launched in 2013 is something significant because this government document caused quite a lot of negative feedback at that time. Yeah. This white paper tries to cover the assumptions and concerns of the government on population. It tries to mention some possible population scenarios for the future and some suggestions and proposals to deal with population for the future. I will not talk about the details of the paper. If you are interested, you can try to find on the web. I guess that is still be on the web. I will just walk through some general lessons that can be learned from this episode. The government claimed that there was no much problem in its assumptions and proposals in this paper, but they may not be communicated well enough for the people to understand and accept. I will not assess the quality of the assumptions and the proposals, but I will say that yes, policy communication is definitely an issue for this one. So it shows that policy communication is important for all policies. The people must know what's going on, understand what's going on, what they should do, why we are doing this, etc. When you have miscommunication, a lot of problems can arise. System dynamics, some of you may have taken some system dynamics course before in BTech. Actually, system dynamics applies to all things, not just engineering and computing. From the concept here, it reflects that a system contains many interrelated components, and each component is forever changing. So in the context of population, something change in population can cause some change on other things and vice versa. So population can affect other things, population can be affected by other things. If the government cannot foresee and manage the interrelations well enough, then the government may create problems on other things while tweaking population. Or the government may create problems on population while tweaking other things. On goals, sometimes the government set goals, but the people do not know about the goals. So it comes as a rude shock when the goals are publicized, which is the case here. Sometimes the government sets goals and the people know about the goals, but they do not understand the goals. In the end, there is a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of conflict, which is the case here. Sometimes the government sets goals and the people know the goals and understand the goals, but they do not share the goals. So the government says that these are my goals for population. The people say, sorry, these are not my goals. My goals are something else. So how can you reconcile between the government and the people and find a consensus? That is a challenge. This is the case. Lastly, for public confidence, I think in general sense, government has to create public confidence from the people, no matter what method you choose. You can use whatever strategy, whatever method, but you must make the people be confident of the government. When the people has many guesses and many doubts about what the government is doing, the people will lose confidence and trust that what the government is doing is for the good of the people. The thinking of the people may be rational, may be irrational, it does not matter. It is the loss of confidence that matters the most. Okay, now we move on to some newer information. So there was a census created not so long ago, and here are some findings of the current trends of Singapore. So I think you can read through on yourself, because most of these are quite self-explanatory and factual by case. I just made a note here, a smaller household do not necessarily imply smaller families and less adults to support old people. There is this finding that there is more smaller households. But it may not mean that these parents are not being supported. Because it is possible that this old person has many children. And these many children are supporting him. It is just that they are not living with him. And each of them has their own families in their own house. So on data, it looks as though everyone has a smaller household, but actually many households form a big extended family. Yeah, so that is what I'm trying to highlight when it comes to data interpretation. Interestingly, there is this rise in residents living in private housing, and the study has found that you have a strong gap forming between the profiles of people living in private housing and people living in HDB flats. So if this gap becomes more prominent, you will have more inequality, you have more unhappiness, you have more division between these two groups of people. It will likely fixate certain group of people to certain housing. So we will stereotype some people, this is the private housing people, this is the HDB housing people, which we are seeing now. Some people, they think that going HDB housing is low class. Sorry, I'm very low class, I'm okay with it. Yeah. If you have this fixation, you have less equality, you have less mobility between the two groups. It will be bad for the country. Then I will also highlight some other peripheral parts. I never really put it in because all these points are already mentioned in the earlier slides or earlier lessons already. So we will not move more. So like more people taking university degree, more dual income couples, and so on and so forth. I think this is self-explanatory and not surprising. When the government conducts such study, it's not just for the sake of data collection. It's really meant to have a better understanding of the ground, and hence you can make better policies. So how should the government policies adjust in view of the trends? The government may want to do something to change or slow down the trends. But some trends like lifespan are fixed and cannot be changed. So for those trends that are fixed and unavoidable, the government may want to come out with something to live with the trend. You can't change it, you can only live with it. Then what should you do to adapt with the times? In closure, Singapore demographics in early times was a result of expanding economic activity more than a cause of expanding economic activity. In other words, it is trying to say that growing trade and economic activity has caused Singapore to have certain population. Instead of certain population right at the start causing Singapore to have growing trade and economic activity. Singapore started with a transient uneven population. Then as time moves by, especially after World War II, there was more collective experience and memory and togetherness among people. We have more people wanting to stay rooted in Singapore. So the profile changed towards permanence and stability towards the 1980s until 1990 plus minus. There is this current trend of immigration fever. So with this current trend, some people may ask, is Singapore going back to the olden days of being migratory and transient again? Some people will say that there is no problem of being transient again, since Singapore traces her roots from migrant movement, and Singapore is just continuing what she is doing in the past during the olden days of colonial rule. I will say yes and no towards this comment. Yes, the movement of people has always been ongoing throughout the years to various extent. Yes, the value of such movement of people is very big and useful. No, because Singapore, the country, will never be formed if Singapore is always a transient society. If Singapore is always a transient society, most of the people in Singapore would not have place identity, would not bother about nation creating process, would not fight for independence of Singapore. Precisely something happened over the years that changed the profile of people and the mindset of people, which led to the creation of Singapore, the country. Singapore definitely needs a balance of temporary people and settled people to sustain. You need temporary people because Singapore flourished based on the support of free mixture, free access, free quantity of people over the years. But you also certainly need settled people in Singapore. Otherwise, who will be the one stepping out to serve in government service and community service? Who will be the one who stay as citizens beyond material reasons? You need a core population to be present to gel community and national interests and to hold the ground pieces together beyond just individual and market interests. The question is never whether Singapore needs foreign people or not, because the answer is definitely yes. Singapore needs foreign people for whatever reasons. So we should not be arguing and discussing this question. More constructive questions to ask would be how to have this migration, how much and how fast to have this migration, and why are you doing this? The crux is in the implementation, meaning the method you use to do something. How can Singapore manage population and migration better? Because there are genuine gaps to improve. The crux is about the objectives of doing something. when the government or the people decided to increase or decrease population, the reason must be for rightful and useful direction. People will be the most important resource, be it from whatever source, be it from whatever origin, because you need to have different types of people to fulfill the needs of diversity, community, flexibility, blah, blah, blah. On this point at the bottom here, I just want to say that it tries to repeat what I mentioned in lesson 10. We should not just focus on resources that we don't have and try to fill the gap of resources we don't have. We should also review resources we have and maximize the potential of resources which we have. If I may give some examples, which can answer your question later. Croatia, and Iceland have quite outstanding performance in the recent World Cups for soccer, if you are a soccer fan. Singapore dreams for some goal for soccer entry in World Cup, but the dream is getting further and further because the gap of our performance and the goal is getting further and further over decades. Croatia and Iceland have less people than Singapore. They have smaller population than Singapore. In fact, Iceland looks tiny in comparison to Singapore. Estonia is a global e-governance forerunner. E-governance means to use technology for governance. The world often uses Estonia as a model example on how to do e-governance and how to do national digitization. Estonia is more comprehensive and more capable than Singapore in this respect. Singapore government likes to brag about small things like the Kappa Act. Yeah. Estonia has come up with a better and a similar Kappa Act earlier than Singapore. Yeah. And the population size of Estonia as compared to Singapore. Please stop moaning that Singapore cannot do this and cannot do that because of a small population. A small country can still achieve something suitable to her, even though she is small. And there are other countries smaller than Singapore. Country performance is not just about how many people you have, it's also about how the people are used and how the people behave. If I give a more economic-centric example, Netherlands, because it has quite a parallel situation as Singapore. Netherlands also does not have big workforce. Netherlands does not have big area of usable land. 2/3 of Netherlands' land shall be flooded during high tide if nothing is managed. So Netherlands look quite okay in size, but with the flooding of the waters, actually the amount of usable land is not high. And yet, Netherlands flourish in sectors that Singapore dreams of, but has yet to excel in. Netherlands has been a strong producer of products and intellectual property created by herself, which is something that Singapore dreams of, but is not yet able to do so. Netherlands is able to have substantial food production, even though she experienced food shortage before. This is something that Singapore also dreams of, but she has yet to be able to do so. Movement across land is always ongoing, even before the human species appears on Earth. So it is natural that people will go to places that serve them better. It's natural that places will attract people who serve them better. You can say that people or humans are selfish and practical, but most of the time, they do not mind other people moving around if their interests and identities are not compromised. It is when there is conflict of interest and identities, then unease arises. So it's more constructive to look into how to reduce the conflict and unease for the benefit and peace of all. Essentially, it means how to tap on to the benefits of migration and globalization and how to reduce the drawbacks and ill effects of it. The dynamics of human race are never ending. You will always have dilemma between people, such as areas mentioned here. These quarrels are always happening in Singapore, in other places as well. Currently, the management of migration in and out of a country is a hot global topic. When it is something global, it means that countries should come together to solve the issue more effectively. But unfortunately, governments of many countries nowadays are more focused on appeasing their citizens and looking inward instead of having a better balance. So no one is really interested to drive the resolution of global issues. When I talk about the topic of migration, I will always see two camps of people of extreme ends. So you will have this camp of people having certain views and perspectives, and that kind of people having certain views and perspectives. Their views and perspectives are very different and opposite, and it is very difficult to change their views and perspectives, and their views and perspectives are mainly due to their backgrounds and their values. I would like to say that please be more objective and understand both sides. Please put yourself in the shoes of others. Ultimately, every one of us is a citizen in a country and a foreigner in all other countries. Please also try to view a person more as a person individually, beyond the affiliated community like the country or the ethnic group. Lastly, to close up, demographics affect governance and policy making and vice versa. So it's trying to say that because Singapore has certain population, therefore certain strategies and policies were created. These are examples of the past. Can you think of some recent examples? The opposite applies as well. Because Singapore has certain strategies and policies, Singapore ends up having certain type of population. So can you find examples of this? Different objectives and different priorities are pursued by Singapore at different times, be it for the case of population management or for other areas. Because of this difference in objectives and priorities, the government will choose different ways to handle what it wants to handle. And with that, I will end the lesson. Thank you. Just to remind you, this is the last physical lesson. So for the next lesson, lesson 12, which is the last lesson, we will not have physical class. So I will release materials for e-learning by 5 p.m. next Wednesday. So you just need to wait for my notice next Wednesday to know what to do to access
I checked the requirement. I don't think I subscribe to 50 subscribers. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.